It was a night of bright lights, soft music, and expensive clothes. The city's richest people were gathering at the Royal Crown Hotel for a grand charity event. The ballroom sparkled with gold decorations, crystal chandeliers, and velvet curtains. Every detail was perfect, from the neatly folded napkins on the tables to the delicate flowers in tall glass vases. The guests arrived in black cars and walked in with smiles and laughter. Men wore tuxedos, women wore shining dresses and diamond jewelry. Waiters moved quickly around the hall, offering drinks and small bites of fancy food. It looked like something from a movie, beautiful, rich, and perfect. In the middle of this crowd, walking quietly between the tables, was Emma. She wore a plain black uniform and carried a silver tray with glasses of champagne. Emma was just 23 years old, working her third job this week. Her eyes were tired and her hands were rough from long hours, but she walked with quiet strength, always careful not to make a sound or drop anything. Emma had been working as a waitress for a few years. She never talked much while working and didn't try to impress anyone. To the guests, she was just part of the background, like the chairs or the lights. No one knew that before this job. Emma used to dream big, but dreams don't always pay the bills. And real life had pulled her into hard choices that night. She had arrived early to help set the tables and polish the glasses. She had watched the musicians practice and had noticed the beautiful black piano sitting in the corner of the stage. It looked like it hadn't been used in years, silent and polished, like a decoration. Emma stared at it for a moment, her fingers twitching slightly, but then she turned away and went back to work. As the event began, the room filled with music and laughter. People clinked glasses, shared stories about their vacations, businesses, and latest purchases. Emma continued her work, silently smiling politely, serving quickly, and staying invisible. But she couldn't help noticing how loud and confident the rich guests were. Many of them spoke like they owned the world. They made big jokes, loud toasts, and some even laughed at the staff. One man stood out among them. He was tall, with a shiny watch, slicked back hair, and a voice that demanded attention. His name was Mr. Langston, a billionaire known for showing off his money and making sharp jokes. He was surrounded by a group of people who laughed at everything he said. He didn't look at Emma like a person. To him, she was just someone who brought him drinks, but Emma didn't care. She had heard people like him before. She had learned to stay calm and quiet and not let things bother her. Still, deep down, she wondered what it must be like to be heard, to be seen not as a servant, but as a person. As she passed by the stage again, her eyes quickly glanced at the piano, and for a second, her heart beat a little faster. Then she took a breath, tightened her grip on the tray, and kept walking. Little did anyone in that hall know that the quiet waitress with the tired eyes was about to change the night completely. No one expected anything from her. No one imagined that she held a secret, one that would silence the entire room, and the grand piano in the corner, so long ignored, would soon carry the voice she had kept hidden for years. That night, in that golden hall full of wealth and noise, something real was about to happen. Not because of the rich, or the music, or the food, but because of a girl who dared to sit down and let her soul speak through the keys of a piano. And it all started with one quiet step toward the light. Emma was moving carefully around the hall with her tray. Just like she had done many times before, she stopped at each table, offering drinks with a gentle smile and quiet voice. Most people didn't notice her much, but she didn't mind. She had learned to stay invisible, to do her work without drawing attention, but that was about to change. Near the edge of the room, the large grand piano sat untouched. Its black surface shone under the lights. But no one had gone near it all evening. It was there for decoration, or maybe someone was supposed to play it later. But for now, it was just quiet and beautiful. Mr. Langston, the loud billionaire, sat near the piano. He had already finished 3 glasses of champagne and was feeling bolder with each sip. He laughed loudly at his own jokes and kept calling the waiters kid or you there. He liked showing everyone that he was richer, smarter, and more powerful. People around him kept laughing, even when his jokes were not funny, just to stay in his good books. Emma walked by his table to refill glasses. She was careful not to look anyone in the eyes, especially not Mr. Langston, but just as she turned to leave, she heard him say something loudly, loud enough that people nearby would hear, "Bet even." "The help thinks they can play Chopin," he said with a smirk. Looking toward the piano, the people at his table chuckled. Then he turned his eyes to Emma and raised his voice. "Hey, you, waitress, you know how to play this thing?" Emma stopped in her tracks. For a moment, she thought maybe he was joking with someone else, but then he pointed at her and said, "Come on now, don't be shy. Let's see what kind of music your hands can make, other than holding a tray." Some people laughed. Others looked away awkwardly. A few looked at Emma with pity. As if to say, "Don't do it," one of the older waiters near her gently whispered, "Don't let him get to you. Just walk away." Emma stood still, her heart beating faster. She looked at Mr. Langston's face, full of pride and mockery. He didn't expect her to play. He didn't even believe she could. He was just trying to make fun of her, to turn her into a joke for his own amusement. Everyone in that part of the hall was now looking at her, some with curiosity, some with discomfort, and some waiting for something entertaining to happen. It felt like the lights got brighter, like the room was suddenly too big and too small. At the same time, Emma had two choices: walk away quietly and let him win, or step into the spotlight and face whatever came next. Her fingers were shaking slightly, but she took a slow breath and said in a soft but steady voice, "May I, Mr.?" Langston laughed, surprised, and waved his hand toward the piano. "Be my guest." "This should be fun," he said with a grin. The people at his table leaned back, ready to enjoy whatever mess they thought would happen. Emma walked slowly toward the grand piano. She set her tray carefully on a nearby table and wiped her hands. On her apron, with each step, the room grew quieter. Conversations slowed. Ace turned toward her, and even the music playing over the speakers was turned down. She reached the piano and sat down on the bench. Her eyes glanced over the keys. Clean and untouched. She hadn't sat at a real piano in years. She used to play every day as a child and teenager. But life had taken her away from that world. She had cleaned hotel rooms, washed dishes, waited tables, but never forgot the feeling of her fingers on piano keys. Now she was back in front of one, not in a concert hall, not in a music school, but in a fancy ballroom full of strangers and one arrogant man who thought she was a joke. Emma placed her hands gently on the keys. She didn't look up, didn't smile, didn't speak. She just closed her eyes and let her memories guide her. No one in the room was laughing now. Even Mr. Langston leaned forward, a bit unsure. And as her fingers began to move, the first soft notes of something beautiful filled the air. The moment Emma sat down at the piano, something changed in the room. The sound of people talking slowly faded, as if the walls were closing in around them. Forks stopped moving. Drinks were left untouched, and every eye in the room turned to her. This wasn't just about a waitress anymore. This was something else. Something nobody expected. Emma took a deep breath, her hands resting gently on the smooth black and white keys. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the stares, the lights, and the heavy silence. All she wanted to feel was the music inside her, the music that had been asleep for years but never fully gone. Mr. Langston leaned back in his chair with a half smile on his face. He didn't believe anything special would happen. To him, this was still just a joke, a moment of entertainment. He whispered to someone beside him, "Let's see how long this takes before she runs away." Some people chuckled softly, but even their laughter sounded unsure now. Emma's fingers moved slowly at first, pressing the first few notes like Testing the water, it was quiet, so quiet you could hear the soft creak of the piano bench. And then, like a wave gently hitting the shore, the melody began. She chose something simple, yet full of emotion: Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. It was a piece she had played hundreds of times in the past. It reminded her of her childhood, of rainy days when she would sit for hours playing while her mother cooked dinner. Each note felt like a piece of her story coming back to life. The music floated through the room, soft and sad and powerful. People who had been laughing now sat in silence. Some leaned forward in their chairs. Some froze with drinks halfway to their mouths. Even the staff paused their work, standing by the walls, eyes wide with surprise. Emma's fingers began to move. More confidently now, faster, lighter, like they had never forgotten. She didn't rush, didn't try to impress. She simply played from her heart. Every note was filled with memories, struggles, and years of silence she had been forced to accept. People who had never spoken to her before were now watching her with respect, even wonder. They weren't just seeing a waitress anymore, they were seeing a musician, an artist, a soul. The kind of soul money couldn't buy and pride couldn't touch. Mr. Langston's smile slowly faded. He sat up straighter, confused and a little uncomfortable. This wasn't funny anymore. The girl he mocked was now controlling the room with nothing but music. His words were forgotten, and her notes were all anyone could hear. At the back of the hall, a woman in a green dress wiped a tear from her eye. She had played piano in her youth too, and recognized the depth of emotion in every note. A man next to her whispered, "She's not just playing, she's feeling." Someone else recorded the moment on their phone without even realizing it. Emma had no idea who was watching, and she didn't care. This moment wasn't for them, was for her. It was a return to herself, a voice she thought she had lost. She felt free for the first time in years. The music swelled and softened, rising like a gentle storm and falling like a whisper. Every note touched something real inside the people listening, and just like that, the room was no longer full of strangers, was full of hearts being moved together. As the final notes echoed off the marble walls and slowly faded into silence, Emma gently lifted her hands from the keys. She opened her eyes slowly, looking down at the piano, not daring to look at the crowd just yet. For a few seconds, there was nothing but stillness, no clapping, no talking, just quiet, powerful silence. The kind of silence that comes only when something true and beautiful has been heard. The kind that fills your chest and makes you forget what you were doing just moments before. The kind that needs no words, because the sound has already said everything. Emma stood up quietly, not smiling, not asking for anything. She turned and began walking back to where her tray was. She didn't bow, didn't wait for applause. She hadn't played for praise. She had played because someone had tried to silence her, and she had chosen music instead. Behind her, the room was still frozen. But that silence wouldn't last long. It was just the beginning of something bigger, something no one in that luxury hall would ever forget. Emma sat at the piano with her eyes still closed. Her heart was beating fast, but her hands had become calm. She took a slow breath and placed her fingers softly on the keys. She didn't rush, didn't look around. She was lost in a world that only she could see. The first few notes were like quiet drops of rain. They were soft, gentle, but full of feeling. No one in the room moved, not even the waiters. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the girl they had ignored just minutes ago. Emma's fingers danced slowly across the keys. At first, her hands were unsure, as if they were remembering something they had forgotten. But soon, the music flowed more smoothly, more confidently. It was like her fingers were speaking for her, telling a story without words. The room was completely silent, except for the sound of the piano. No glasses clinked, no one whispered, no one laughed. Even Mr. Langston, who had made the joke, sat still, his expression unreadable. The music had taken over the entire room. People who didn't even like classical music felt something deep inside. It wasn't just the melody, it was the way Emma played it. Like each note carried a piece of her soul, her pain, her hope. Her strength, it was all there in the way she touched each key. Some people began to close their eyes, just listening. Some had goosebumps on their arms. Some had memories of their own, of love, of loss, of dreams they once had. It felt like time had slowed down and the room had changed. Emma was no longer just a waitress, she was a storyteller, and the piano was her voice. She didn't need to explain anything, her music said it all. She wasn't trying to impress anyone, she was simply being herself. The song she played, Moonlight Sonata, was sad but beautiful. It rose and fell like waves in the ocean, calm but powerful. With every passing moment, her playing became more graceful, more alive. People couldn't believe that someone working as a server could create something so moving. Some of the guests looked at each other, their faces full of surprise. How had no one noticed her before? How had they walked past her so many times without ever wondering who she really was? Now, they saw her not as a girl in a uniform, but as someone who carried something rare, true talent. Mr. Langston didn't know what to say. He had expected to laugh, to mock, to feel clever, but now he felt small, like he had missed something important. The girl he had tried to embarrass was now holding the entire room in the palm of her hand. Emma continued to play, her eyes half open now. She didn't smile, but she looked peaceful. This was where she belonged, not in the middle of the crowd, but at the heart of the music. She didn't need applause. She didn't need praise. She just needed to play. Each note was like a heartbeat. Each pause was like a breath. She poured years of silence, struggle, and sacrifice into those few minutes. And the people in the hall felt it even if they didn't fully understand it. As she neared the end of the song, her touch grew even softer. The last notes fell like feathers in the air. Floating slowly, she lifted her hands gently from the keys and let the final sound fade into the air, and then nothing. The room stayed completely still. No one clapped, no one moved, not because they didn't like it, but because they were still lost in the moment. It was the kind of silence that comes only after something deeply beautiful. The kind that makes people forget where they are for a second. The kind that wraps around your heart and holds it still. Emma stood up slowly from the bench. She didn't bow, she didn't speak. She turned quietly and began walking back to where her tray was. She didn't look for anyone's reaction. She had played for herself, not for them. Behind her, the piano stood still and silent again. But it wasn't just a decoration anymore. It had become a part of the story, a witness to something real, and so had everyone in that room. Emma returned to her place among the staff. Her heart was still beating fast, but her face stayed calm. No one stopped her, no one spoke, because at that moment, words were not enough. The last note Emma played was still floating in the air when she stood up and walked away from the piano. But no one clapped right away. The hall, once filled with laughter and loud voices, had become completely quiet. It was the kind of silence that made people hold their breath without even knowing it. Everyone in the room was still thinking about what they had just heard. Emma returned to her corner like nothing had happened. She picked up her tray, straightened her apron, and quietly waited for instructions. But the guests weren't ready to go back to their food or drinks just yet. Something inside them had changed, and they didn't know how to explain it. People looked at each other, wide-eyed and amazed. They had expected a moment of humor, maybe even embarrassment. Instead, they had been given something far more powerful, real, raw emotion through music. A woman in a blue gown wiped a tear from the corner of her eye. She hadn't cried in years, but the music brought back a memory of her mother playing the piano when she was a child. Next to her, an older gentleman, a retired music professor, whispered, "That wasn't practice. That was feeling. The man he was talking to nodded slowly and said, She hasn't played in a long time, but you can tell." Inside her, the whole room was still under the spell of Emma's performance. Even the chandeliers seemed to shine a little softer, as if they, too, had been listening, for the first time that night. The wealth, the diamonds, and the designer clothes didn't seem so important. All anyone could think about was the girl in the plain black uniform who had made the piano come alive. Even the waiters were stunned. Some of them had worked with Emma for months, even years, but none of them had ever seen this side of her. They knew she was quiet, hardworking, and polite, but they didn't know she carried such a gift. One of the younger waiters whispered to another, "Did you know she could play like that?" The other shook his head, eyes still on the piano. "No, I don't think even she knew she still could." Mr. Langston, who had started the whole thing with his cruel joke, sat silently. His wineglass was untouched, his eyes fixed on the stage. Where Emma had just sat, the smirk on his face was gone, replaced by something else: confusion, maybe shame. He had wanted to humiliate her, but now he felt like the foolish one. No one was looking at him anymore. All eyes had shifted away, as if the room itself had decided who deserved attention. And it wasn't the rich man with the expensive suit, it was the young woman who spoke through music. In one corner of the hall, a man with a small camera put down his drink and pressed record. He had captured most of Emma's performance, without even thinking about it. Now he looked at the video on his phone, shaking his head in disbelief. "People need to see this," he whispered to himself. He didn't know Emma's name, but he knew that the world needed to hear her play. At the same time, a music producer who had come to the gala as a guest leaned over to his assistant. "Find out who she is," he said quickly. "I don't care if she's a waitress or a student. That kind of talent doesn't come around often." The spell of silence was finally broken by a single sound clap. One person started clapping, then another and another. In seconds, the entire room stood up and began to applaud, but it wasn't the usual polite clapping people did at events. It was loud, real, and full of emotion. People were cheering, whistling, even wiping their eyes. Some stood on their toes to get a better look at Emma. She looked surprised, but didn't smile too much, just a small, shy nod as she continued her work. She didn't play for applause. She didn't play for praise. She played because something deep inside her needed to come out. And that truth had touched every heart in the room. Even Mr. Langston, slowly, began to clap, but it was too late. He was no longer the center of attention. In fact, no one cared what he thought anymore. That night, people came to the gala expecting fancy food, wine, and maybe some business talk. Instead, they got something unforgettable. They saw a girl with calloused hands and a quiet face remind them of something they had forgotten: that beauty, grace, and strength don't always wear a crown or a suit. Sometimes they wear an apron and carry a tray. Sometimes they sit at a piano, close their eyes, and let their soul speak louder than any words ever could. Emma stood in the corner of the hall, holding her tray again. She looked calm, but inside, her heart was still beating fast. She had just played the piano in front of rich and powerful people. She had not planned it, and she never thought she would do something like that. But now it had happened, and the room had changed because of it. People were still clapping when she walked back to her spot. Some guests were even standing, clapping with both hands and smiling brightly. They weren't cheering for a famous star or a performer in a gown. They were cheering for a quiet waitress who had touched their hearts with her music. Emma didn't look for attention. She didn't bow, wave, or act proud. She just nodded once, then stood still, as if nothing big had happened. But deep inside, she felt something warm, like a small light had turned back on. Mr. Langston, the man who had made fun of her, sat silently. His usual proud expression was gone. He didn't clap at first, but then slowly began to join the others. He looked around and saw how everyone's eyes were now focused on Emma and at him. For the first time that evening, he didn't feel important. He felt small, almost embarrassed. He had laughed at her, tried to make her look weak. But she hadn't shouted or argued. She had simply played, and that was stronger than anything he could have said. Her music had answered him in a way that words never could. A woman in a silver dress walked over to Emma. She was one of the guests and had tears in her eyes. That was breathtaking, she said softly. Where did you learn to play like that? Emma smiled politely and replied, My mother taught me when I was young. I used to play every day, but I haven't touched a piano in years. The woman looked surprised. You mean no recent training? Emma shook her head. No, life got busy. I had to work. Another man, tall and well-dressed, stepped forward. He was a music teacher from a well-known school. I've taught students for over 20 years, he said, and I've rarely seen someone play with that much emotion. Would you consider studying music again? Emma looked down for a moment. I would love to, she said honestly. But it's hard to afford. My family depends on my job, and we have bills to pay. The man nodded with respect. He didn't push further, but he knew he had just seen something special. He promised himself he would not forget her face or her name at the other end of the room. A young man was still watching the video he had recorded of her performance. He uploaded it to his social media account and added a caption, Waitress stuns Billionaire gala with a piano performance that silences the room. He didn't expect much, but within minutes, likes and comments started pouring in. People online were just as touched as the ones in the hall. They asked, who is she? What's her story? Some even called her an angel in disguise. Without knowing it, Emma's moment was already spreading beyond those walls. Meanwhile, the hotel manager came up to Emma. He had seen the whole thing and was now smiling wide. You've made this night unforgettable, he said. I think we'll need to talk about your future here. Maybe something beyond serving tables. Emma nodded, unsure of what he meant. She didn't want any special treatment. But it felt nice to be seen not as a worker, but as a person. Suddenly, the man from earlier, the one sitting beside Mr. Langston, stood up and walked toward Emma. He was wearing a dark suit and had a kind smile. He was a music producer, though Emma didn't know it yet. Do you mind if I speak with you after the event? He asked. I think there may be opportunities for you, if you're interested. Emma was surprised, but she nodded. She didn't know what kind of opportunities he meant. But for the first time in a long time, she felt a door might be opening. A door, she thought, had been closed forever. Mr. Langston watched all of this quietly. He wanted to say something, maybe apologize, but the words wouldn't come. He realized that no amount of money or power could undo what had happened, and that, sometimes, the loudest voice in the room is not the one speaking, it's the one playing. Emma had come to work that night expecting nothing more than tired feet and empty thanks. Instead, she found a forgotten part of herself. And in doing so, she reminded everyone in that hall of something important. Real beauty doesn't wear diamonds or boast loudly. It sits quietly, waiting for the right moment to shine. And that moment had arrived through her fingers and a song. After the event ended, some guests left with smiles, still talking about the music they had just heard. Others stayed behind, hoping to speak with the girl who had played the piano like a professional. But Emma had gone back to her duties, helping clear the tables and collecting empty glasses. To her, it was just another work night, even though her heart felt different, lighter. Brighter. She had done something brave, something honest, and for once, she felt proud of herself. The man in the dark suit, the music producer, waited near the exit, holding a small card in his hand when he saw Emma walking past. He gently stepped forward and said, Hi, I just wanted to thank you. Your performance tonight was unforgettable." Emma smiled shyly. "Thank you, sir," she said politely, trying to move past. But he wasn't finished. "I'm not just another guest," he added. "I work with musicians. I help people like you record and share their music with the world." Emma stopped and looked at him with wide eyes. "You mean? Like a music company?" He nodded, handing her the card. "Here's my contact information. I'm not making promises. But if you're willing, I'd like to hear more from you play again. Maybe in a studio." Emma took the card carefully, almost as if it might disappear. She read the name and logo, then looked back at the man. "I've never done anything like that," she said softly. "That's okay," he replied. "You have something you can't teach, Hart? We can work with that." Emma didn't know what to say. Her mind raced with questions. Could this be real? Could she really get another chance at music after so many years away? She looked down at the card again, holding it close like it was something special. A few minutes later, a kind-looking older woman approached her. She was the one who had cried during the song. "My husband and I run a small music school for students who can't afford expensive lessons," she said. "I would love for you to visit us sometime. Maybe play for the children, maybe even teach." Emma couldn't believe what she was hearing. In just one night, her world had turned upside down. For years, she had been working in silence, hiding her talent. Now, strangers were offering her chances she had only dreamed about. Later that night, as she walked home alone, the city lights sparkled around her. The streets were quiet, and the cool air touched her face gently. She held the card tightly in her hand, her steps slow but full of thought. It felt like she was holding a small key, one that could open a door she had once closed. When she reached her small apartment, she sat on the bed and looked at the ceiling. She thought about her past, how her father got sick, how money became a problem. She had quit her music school to take care of him, working double shifts too. Pay for medicine and rent. She had cried many nights, alone, wondering if giving up her dreams had been the right choice. But now, after one unexpected moment, people were seeing her again, just as a waitress, but as someone with something beautiful to offer. And even though her life hadn't been easy, this one moment reminded her of who she really was inside. She thought of her mother, who used to sit by the piano while Emma played. Her mother always said, "Music isn't just sound, it's feeling. When you play with feeling, people will listen." Tonight, those words had come true. The next day, the video of Emma playing the piano had already been shared hundreds of times online. People commented things like pure talent, emotional and powerful, and she needs to be discovered. Some even started searching for her name. But Emma didn't know yet that she was becoming an inspiration to many. All she knew was that her music still lived inside her. And now, the world had finally heard it. She wasn't famous, not yet, but she was no longer invisible. She was someone who had spoken through sound when words were not enough. She sat quietly by her window, looking out at the night sky. In her heart, she still felt unsure about the future, but for the first time in a long time, she felt hope. Not just hope for a better job or more money, but hope for her dream. A dream that had once seemed far away, but now felt possible again. And it had all started with one unexpected moment, one cruel comment, and one brave step toward a piano that had been waiting for her all along. The next few days after the gala felt like a dream for Emma. She went back to work as usual, putting on her uniform, carrying trays, and helping guests. But something was different now. People looked at her differently, not with pity or with blank faces. They looked at her with respect, with admiration. Some even smiled and whispered, "You're the girl who played the piano." The video of her performance had now gone viral on social media. Thousands of people were watching and sharing it. Comments flooded in from all over the world. Some said, "This gave me goosebumps." Others wrote, "Talent like this should never be hidden." People were moved not just by the music, but by her story how a quiet waitress had silenced a room full of billionaires with nothing but a song. Emma didn't know how to react to all the attention. She had lived in the shadows for so long, she wasn't used to people knowing her name. She wasn't used to strangers cheering for her. She still took the bus to work, still helped her mother cook dinner, still counted every dollar. But now, spark had been lit in her heart. The music producer who had given her his card called her a few days later. He invited her to visit a recording studio in the city. Emma was nervous, but said yes. When she arrived, she was amazed. There were shiny instruments, soundproof walls, and people who lived and breathed music. They gave her a seat at the piano and asked her to play whatever she wanted. She closed her eyes, placed her fingers on the keys, and played again. This time, not for survival, not for a crowd, but for herself. She played her own song, one she had written years ago and never shared with anyone. When she finished, the room was quiet. One of the sound engineers stood up and said, "You don't just play music, you tell stories." From that moment, things moved quickly. The studio offered to help her record her first album. The video continued to grow online, and newspapers began asking for interviews. Even a morning news show wanted her to perform live. Emma still couldn't believe it. Just a few weeks ago, no one knew who she was. She had no money, no contacts, and no plan to become famous. She only had a memory, a dream, and the courage to touch the keys again when life gave her a chance. One day, while walking home, she passed by a music school she used to dream about attending. She stopped and looked at the building. A little girl walked out, holding her mother's hand and carrying a small violin case. Emma smiled, remembering how she once carried her own hope in her arms like that. Later that week, the woman from the gala, the one who ran the small school, called her. She asked if Emma could come and talk to the children about her journey, maybe even play for them. Emma agreed with a full heart. She walked into the classroom filled with kids from different backgrounds. Some of them were shy, some looked tough. But when she sat at the piano and played, their eyes lit up. Afterward, one of the little girls walked up and said, "I want to play like you one day." Emma bent down and said gently, "You already can. You just have to believe it and never stop trying." Word spread quickly. People wanted to hear her story, hear her music, feel what she made them feel. Offers came from music labels, from event organizers, from charity groups. But Emma chose carefully. She didn't want to chase fame. She wanted to share meaning. She wanted to remind people that real talent isn't about showing off. It's about feeling something deeply and having the courage to share it. As for Mr. Langston, the man who had once mocked her, he stayed quiet. He never spoke publicly about that night, but people remembered. They remembered how he had laughed at her, and how she had responded not with anger, but with beauty. She didn't need revenge. She didn't need to fight. She had let the music speak for her, and it had spoken louder than any insult ever could. Emma's life changed. But she didn't forget where she came from. She still helped her mother, still visited her old coworkers at the hotel. And every time she played the piano, she remembered that night, the night she found her voice again. The night she reminded a room full of rich people that sometimes the most powerful person in the room isn't the loudest. It's the one with the quiet hands and the loudest heart. Her story became a symbol, not just of talent, but of grace, strength, and truth. And all of it started with one moment, one song, one brave girl, and one piano.